Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Jaime, he was sitting in his office talking to Tyrion when the commotion began outside. Jumping up, he ran to the door just as Jaehaerys reached it, Loras running after him. His first thoughts were that something had happened to Jon. But while the expression on Jaehaerys' face was worried, it wasn't panicked. Before he got the chance to ask the guard anything, though, Jaehaerys was speaking. "My lord, you must come. Jon's been summoned by the king." Jaehaerys said as he tried to catch his breath. "Summoned? What happened?" Jaime asked. "We were coming back from the tavern, my lord, when some gold cloaks and a king's guard stopped us, telling Jon had to come with them. Then Sir Barristan turned up and Jon sent me to tell you, my lord. I think it's to do with last night, the fish lord." Jared said as Loras looked on angrily. "Sir Barristan was there when they took Jon?" Jaime asked, holding on to the one positive piece of news. "Aye, he was my lord." Got very angry at the other king's guard. "He did," Jared said with a smile. His breathing a little steadier now. "And Eilers is with Jon also." "Aye, my lord, he is." "Right, Loras, and Jorah's go get me a dozen guards. Make sure Arlen and Pharaoh are among them. We'll meet you outside." Jaime said. He watched as Loras and Jorah rushed out and turned to Tyrion, who was looking at him speculatively. Jaime nodded at him and walked to get his sword and strap it to him, Tyrion jumping from his chair. "Jaime, you can't just barge in there armed." "I know that, but whatever the damn fish is saying, when I turn up, I want them to know just how angry I am at it. To them, Jon may have no status, but I do, and I'll leave them in no damn doubt that these actions have angered the Warden of the West." Jaime said, his voice cold and calm. "All right, I'll go get Jurin. We'll follow as quick as we can." Tyrion said, and Jaime smiled at him. "Thanks, brother." Once he was ready, he rushed out of the room, quickly making his way to the courtyard. He was pleased to see Jaqen and Loras had done as he asked. The guards were assembled. Arlen and Pharaoh at the front of them, armed and ready to go. Knowing Sir Barristan was with Jon had calmed him down somewhat. Should the worst come to the worst, then Barristan would protect the king, but still he would take no chances. Arlen and Pharaoh were his own two guards. He picked them out personally from among the ranks of the household guards at Casterly Rock. He had ensured after Cersei's attempt at Jon's life that each of his family would be protected by the very best. If he could, he'd have given them to Jon, though. As good as Jars and Eilers were, his guards were better. But people thinking Jon a bastard paid no attention to him having bastards for guards. They would with Arlen and Pharaoh guarding him. He nodded to the men and they turned and began to walk quickly to the Red Keep. Riding would be quicker, but the time needed to ready the horses would be time wasted. He hadn't expected Tully to bring a complaint against Jon. He'd assumed the man would, after speaking to his lords, realize he'd made a fool of himself. He'd underestimated the man's pride, or perhaps his hatred for Jon ran deeper than he thought. "He'll be fine, Loras," Jaime said, turning to his squire, who looked as agitated as he felt. "I should have been with him, my lord," the boy said, dejectedly. "Really? Did you know the king was going to order him to court?" Jaime said, looking at him. "Of course not, my lord." "Then, how were you to know that he may need you with him?" "Loras, I know he's your friend and you both want to protect each other, but you can't be with each other every minute of the day. All you can do is be there for each other when you can." Shane said, and Loras looked up at him before nodding. "Jon will be fine, my lord." Loras then said, determinedly. "Aye, lad, he will." Jaime reached out to ruffle the boy's hair, getting a forced laugh in return. It took them a few moments to make it to the Red Keep, and they were then escorted through the halls by a rather large number of guards. Jaime knew his appearance at the head of a dozen guards would provoke a reaction, and he was glad of it. Let them know just how valued Jon was to the Warden of the West. It would stop them doing something like this again without thinking through the consequences. When they reached the main door, they were asked to disarm. Instead, though, Jaime refused and told his men to wait outside unless they were called, his actions getting a furious reaction from the captain of the guards. "Loras, hand Arlen your sword. You'll come in with me. The rest of you wait here unless I call for you." "My lord, surely you're not suggesting," the captain said. "I suggest nothing, but, unlike you, I've seen what happens when a lord paramount gives up his weapons to a king." Jaime said angrily, "I, sir, shall not make the same mistake Lord Rickard did." He pushed past the guard and entered the throne room. He was stunned to see how full it was. Either something was happening here already, or word had spread very quickly. Jon was standing in front of the throne. Edmure Tully beside him, and Jaime had to resist the urge to draw his sword and carve himself some trout. Cersei sat beside the king, and the look on her face when she saw him made him want to gut her too. She was behind this, he now knew. He had received 2 notes from her at the feast last night, both of which he refused to even accept. As the night went on, her seductive look had changed into a glowering one. He kicked himself now for not realizing she would try and get back at him. Though Jon, just as she did before, this time though being more clever about it. As he looked at her, he knew though, if anything happened to hurt even a hair on Jon's head, he'd follow through on his threat to her. Lord Arryn was standing to the side of the king, and he looked at him smugly. The old falcon obviously trying to send Jaime a message. Oh, how he'd take pleasure in clipping his wings once and for all, he thought. To the left of the king stood Ser Barristan and Ser Aerys. Jaime was pleased to see his brother here, and the nod he got from him reassured him somewhat. Jon looked calm and composed, and despite Jaime's nervousness, he felt a large amount of pride looking at his king. Most boys would quiver and shake being called before the throne. But Jon was made of sterner stuff, and Jaime felt sorry for the floppy fish beside him. Given the looks Jon was giving Tully, there would be fish on the menu soon. Lord Jaime, glad you could join us, Jon Arryn said, and Jaime composed himself slightly before speaking. Your Grace, he nodded to the false king and queen. What is the meaning of this? Why has my squire been summoned here, and why was I not notified? Jaime said loudly. We're getting to the bottom of that, Lord Yanta, Robert said, and Jaime could see him side-eye the queen. He and Loras moved behind Jon, and he was happy at the small smile he gave them both. He looked to the left of the room to see Loras's family were all there. Margaery standing uncomfortably beside the prince, who had a gleeful smile on his face. Scattered around the hall was a lot of the noble lords and ladies who'd come for the tourney, the river lords looking like they wanted to be anywhere but here. Jaime was pleased to see the northerners here. The looks the large young man and striking woman were giving the river lords and Tully would surely make them nervous had they been looking at them. Turning his attention back, he gave his sister such a look of disdain that he could see her taken aback, her gleeful look replaced with one of shock. Now let's get this sorted and get the damn tourney started, Robert said impatiently. Jon, before Jaim's arrival, being escorted through the streets by an assortment of gold cloaks and a Kingsguard, had unsurprisingly drawn attention. The small folk pointed and stared, and Jon looked at them and tried to look as stoic as possible. As they had neared the Red Keep, they ran into Sir Wendell and the rest of the northern party, and Jon smirked as Daisy shouted loudly, Snow, what's going on? These southern softies giving you trouble, lad? No, it's fine, Daisy. Apparently the king wishes my presence. Oh, to be popular, Small Jon japed, earning him a sharp elbow in the ribs from Daisy. Are you sure, Jon? Daisy said, looking at the guards. I am, though. You can join us if you wish. Never know what kind of entertainment there is to be found, Jon said, laughing. Daisy, Small Jon and the 2 Karstarks, along with Sir Wendell and a number of their men, decided to do just that, and Jon breathed a small sigh of relief. He knew he was in no real danger. The worst that could happen would be he would be told to apologize to the floppy fish and perhaps banned from the tourney. But still, the last Stark called before the king did not do so well, and while Jon was embracing his dragon side, he was a wolf, too. Speaking of which, he laughed when Small Jon asked him about Ghost. Do you really have a direwolf? Small Jon asked. Sir Wendell's family was most kind to deliver Ghost to me. Ghost? Daisy asked. You'll understand when you see him, Jon sniggered. When they got to the Red Keep, they were made relinquish their weapons. Jon was not pleased to hand over the wolf's tooth, the sword Jaime had bought for him being something he'd grown comfortable with wearing. Though he did quickly get over that when Daisy began handing her weapons over. A mace, a knife, a dagger, some small throwing knives, another dagger, on and on it went, and by the end of it, Jon had counted 17 separate weapons. Really? He looked at Daisy and raised his eyebrow. A woman can't be too careful now, can she? Snow, Daisy said, and they both broke into laughter, quickly being joined by the others. When they were unarmed, they were brought into the throne room. Jon gasped when he saw the king wasn't there. Instead, the queen sat on the small seat beside the Iron Throne. Lord Arryn standing on the other side of it, Tully was standing in front, and Jon looked to see the tie rails off to the side. Margaery sending him a small smile, which he returned. For the first time, Jon was actually nervous. Robert, though he had his many faults, and though he could never forgive the man, had if anything treated Jon better than his own uncle did. Whatever punishment he'd face now would surely be harsher. He moved in front of the throne and looked around for Sir Barristan, finding to his dismay the man had not arrived yet. "Your Grace," Jon said, taking a knee. "Lord Hand," he bowed when he stood up. "Do you know why you've been brought here, Snow?" The Queen said and looked at him contemptuously. "I do not, Your Grace. Lord Tully has brought to our attention your disgraceful actions of last night, how you attacked him for no reason. Do you know the punishment for such an attack, Jon Snow?" "No, Your Grace. I do not." "Lord Hand, why don't you inform him? An attack on a Lord Paramount or his heir by a bastard is the equivalent of an attack on a member of the royal family by anyone. The sentence is simple. If found guilty, Jon Snow would lose his hand, Your Grace." Jon heard the angry shouts from the Northerners, the shriek and look of dismay on Margaery's face, only to be discomforted even more by the look of delight the Crown Prince was showing as he stood beside her. He looked to see the River Lords looking down at the ground, apparently honest enough to show shame, though he doubted any would be willing to go against their liege's son. "Do you have anything to say, Snow?" the Queen asked, the first smile he'd ever seen reach her eyes appearing on her face. Jon took a breath. He looked to Tully, the man's superior shit-eating grin annoying him. He was bigger than him, stronger, but he was no swordsman. Jon could take him. He knew. He would receive no justice here, which really left him only one choice. "I choose." "What is the meaning of this?" The king's voice boomed across the hall. "All rise for his grace, King Robert Baratheon, the first of his name." The herald shouted, though still lower than the king's voice had been. "Who called this without informing me?" "My love, you were busy, and this was such a trifling matter." The queen's voice was soft and light. "Trifling woman, you have the son of the Warden of the North here on bloody trial." Robert looked at her angrily. "Bastard son," Jon Arryn said. "Ned's son," Robert said furiously. "Your Grace, if we may take a moment, please," Jon Arryn said and motioned Robert to the back of the room. Jon stood there and watched as the king and the hand argued in the corner, Robert shaking his head while Jon Arryn tried again and again to get him to see some point. Eventually the two men came back and Jon could see how annoyed the king was. "I'm sorry, lad. It seems we must get to the bottom of this, but it'll be fair. I promise you that." The king smiled sadly at him. "Of course, Your Grace. I expect nothing less." "Good lad." Before they could begin, Jaime arrived, and Jon felt himself smile, as Jaime addressed the king and then stood with Loras behind him. He steadied himself and got ready for what was to come. Smirking, he looked at Barristan as he hit upon an idea. "Jon, after Jaime's arrival." "So, Lord Tully, begin." Robert said, his annoyance clear in his voice. Your Grace, my Lord Hand." "My lords and ladies," Edmure started, and Jon was already bored. "Last night, while minding my own business," a snort from Loras behind him made him smirk as Edmure continued. "As I said, while minding my own business, I was set upon and attacked by the bastard Jon Snow. He forced me to the floor, and when I calmly asked for an apology, he did so again. Your Grace, you were forced to the floor by a 10-name-day-old boy, Lord Tully," the king said, laughing, and Jon smirked as others in the room joined in. He caught me by surprise, Your Grace, bastards. They're tricksters. Had I been expecting it, he never would have managed it, Your Grace." A louder snort from Loras this time. Even had the king sniggering. "So if I have this straight, Lord Tully, you wanted Jon Snow's hand because he pushed you to the ground," the king said, and a few members of the assembled lords gasped. "Ayaz, Your Grace, the punishment is clear. It is the king's law." Edmure said. "Lord Yakum speaks true, Your Grace," Jon Arryn said, and Jon glowered at him, pleased to see the old lord looking warily at him. "Very well, Lord Tully." "Do you have any witnesses to you claims?" the king asked. "Your Grace, I am a Lord Paramount's son. It is my word against that of a bastard, under the law." Yes, but it is the king's law, is it not? And last I looked, I am still the king." "Of course, Your Grace. If need be, I'm sure I can provide witnesses." Edmure said shakily. Jon looked to the River Lords trying to find Lord Lannister and his son. He was both pleased and disappointed to see them absent. It meant at least they would not support Edmure's claims, but neither would they confirm Jon's defense. He heard Jaime cough behind him and turned to see both him and Loras move closer. He smiled and nodded at them before noticing Tyrion and Jurian come into the room, both dwarfed by the white wolf that pushed past them to rush to his side. "What is that beast?" Have it removed at once. Guards! The voices mingling together, Jon just shrugged as Ghost lay down on the floor beside him. He reached down and rubbed the wolf's fur, feeling the muscles tensed beneath his hand. He closed his eyes and felt himself calm down, the wolf's muscles relaxing as he did so. Opening his eyes, he turned to where the northerners were seeing the white wolf for the first time. Small Jon looking at the wolf in wonder. Your Grace, I assure you, Ghost will cause no trouble. I may not have my father's name, but I hold my word just as truly as he would. No word means more to me, nor oath I take more seriously, young Snow. Robert smiled at him. Now enough about the damn wolf. He's fine as he is. Robert, my love, surely we can't allow such a beast in the throne room. I said enough. Robert glared at the Queen, who shook her head and looked affronted. Now where were we, Jon Snow? We've heard Lord Tully's version. Now, if you would. Robert said, looking at him. Of course, your Grace. Last night, as Lord Tully stated, we had an altercation at the feast. Jon said to the sound of gasps and muttering of bastard from around the room. However, your Grace, I find Lord Tully's version left out a few key details. Jon paused. What details are these, Jon? The king said, moving forward in the throne. Your Grace, Lord Tully was drunk. Very drunk. He insulted me. Which was fine. I know my status and what it means to be a bastard. I know that even if a lord is in the wrong, then a bastard still under the law has no recourse. So, your Grace, I did my best to ignore Lord Tully, until he made insults. I could not ignore. What insults, lad? The king now keenly listening. He insulted my mother, your Grace, called her a whore. By doing so, he insulted my father, also your Grace, by saying my father, the most noble and good man Westeros has ever known, would sleep with a whore. He insulted Ned. You dare insult Ned? Robert shouted at Edmure. The bastard lies, your Grace. It's what they do. Ask him. Ask him about pushing me, your Grace. You would dare insult your own good brother, my oldest and truest friend. You're lucky my hammer is put away, or they'd be wiping you from the very place you stand. Your Grace, Lord Tully denies the bastard's accusation. We must believe him. Jon Arryn said. Jon watched in amusement as Lord Arryn struggled to rein in the king's temper. He had to give Edmure some credit. He half expected to be standing in a pool of water by now, but perhaps it was the fact it was still a bastard making the accusations which gave him comfort. Can you prove your words, lad? The kings asked. I can, your Grace, but I won't. I'll not have anyone else fight my battles for me. I was raised better than that. Aye, that you were, lad. The king smiled at him. What of the fact you pushed Lord Tully to the floor twice? Jon Arryn said clearly, trying to get to another part of the topic, one where the king's feelings for Ned Stark may play out more in Lord Tully's favor. Lord Tully fell my lord hand twice. He really was quite drunk, Jon said, and the king laughed again. Liar, you're a damn lying bastard. You pushed me. Your true nature is showing here, bastard. What about the words you spoke to Lord Tully, young Snow? The queen said, and Jon bristled. Words? What words? The king asked. He called me an oathbreaker, said my house would fall with me leading it. Is that true, lad? Not quite, your Grace, Jon said. I called his house oathbreakers and said that a house ran by a drunken fool would surely find its level quite soon. Jon said, and this time even Robert looked taken aback. Explain yourself, lad, the king said, and Jon took a breath. Last night, Lord Tully was so drunk he thought it prudent to attack a 10-name-day-old boy, first with his words and then twice made an attempt to attack me physically. Your Grace, both of which ended up with him falling on his arse, begging your pardon, your Grace. Jon said and watched as the king laughed loudly. Surely a man who would drink so much that he could barely stand, let alone control his mouth or actions, is not someone fit to rule a noble house, let alone be Lord Paramount. One day, so I informed Lord Tully of this, and apologized both to his lords and to the lords and ladies present for having to suffer him. The king laughed loudly, and Jon bit his cheek to stop from doing likewise. You also called his house oathbreakers, though, did you not? Lord Arryn said. Aye, did my lord. You see, the bastard admits it. From his own words, he admits what he said. Edmure said gleefully, I'm sorry, my lord, but either I'm a liar like all bastards or I'm telling the truth. Surely it can't be both. Jon said, and most of the room burst into laughter. That's not what I was saying. I told you your Grace bastards are. Trixie, my lord, yes, we get it. We lie. We tell the truth. We're Trixie. Do we also stop the sun from rising or the moon from being full? Jon said, and the laughter increased. Enough. Quiet. You still have not explained calling House Tully oath breakers, and bear in mind, young Snow, that this is the house of my good brother and good father. You call into question, Lord Arryn said, and even the king looked shocked at the anger in the old man's voice. Jon held his tongue, spelling out Lord Arryn's bias would do him no favors. It's the king he needed to convince, and accusing his foster father of not being fair was not the way to go. Are they not? Jon said, and watched as both the king and the hand looked at him angrily. Explain yourself, boy, the king growled at him. House Tully swore an oath to a king, and broke that oath. They swore to serve in perpetuity and broke that oath. Your grace, a man who kills is a killer. A man who steals is a thief. A house that breaks an oath. Are oath breakers, are they not? Not an oath to the damned dragons, the king said angrily. Your grace, what if someone was to say the same of the oaths they swore to you? Jon said, and watched as first the king looked as if he would attack him right there, and then seemed to calm himself some. No one would dare, the king said, and murmurs of agreement were heard around the room. Of course not, your grace, but it does not change the truth. Someone who breaks an oath is an oath breaker. You speak out of turn, boy, Lord Arryn said. I speak the truth, my lord, as my father would if he was standing here in my stead. There was silence for a few moments. Jon Arryn looked at him with hate in his eyes, and Jon stared right back at the man. Let him dare stand and judge of a dragon. One day soon, the tables would be turned. He looked then to the king, who seemed torn, which really was the best he could hope for. Around him the lords and ladies were speaking to each other. He knew some would care not what he said, and would expect a bastard to be punished. Others, though, perhaps would listen. He could see Lord Darry, Lord Mooton, and one or two of the Crownlands lords who'd supported his father were impressed. The lords of the Narrow Sea were looking on intrigued, while the expression on the lords of the Reach were mixed, the most devout shaking their heads, while the largest, most loyal to his family previously, were looking pleased. He saw Lady Olenna and Lord Metz were looking at him with approval, and he nodded to them, much to Lady Olenna's amusement. Finally he caught Margaery's eye, and though she gave him a welcoming smile, she looked worried. He couldn't help but smirk at her and roll his eyes, holding back a snort as she giggled. As the king took more time, the voices grew louder, before finally Robert seemed to have reached a decision. Enough, the king shouted. What am I to do here? You both say one thing, and neither of you has produced witnesses to prove your point. Who am I to believe? The law is clear, your grace, Jon Arryn said. I'm not taking the lad's hand for this, Jon. What's next, burning people? The king said, and Jon Arryn stepped back abashed. Jon Snow, your king orders you to apologize to Lord Tully. Let that be the end of this madness. Of course, your grace. I assume Lord Tully will apologize also. Jon said, and the room once again gasped. He felt Edmure bristle beside him. Apologize to a bastard. I will not. Never would I live the shame down. Edmure said angrily. Then, your grace, I'm afraid I cannot apologize either. I can take the insult to myself and mine own honor. I will not let a man who insulted my mother, a man who insulted my father, walk away without offering an apology to both. As a bastard, my honor is in question simply because of my birth. My mother's honor, my father's honor, however, is not. Since Lord Edmure is also a knight of the realm, if he refuses to apologize, then he leaves me with no choice. Under the chivalric code, I challenge you, Sir Edmure Tully, to an honor duel. Jon waited as the words filtered to the crowd. He looked to Sir Barristan, who was smiling at him, though the knight also showed some concern, which he tried to alleviate with a nod. He felt Jaime take a step behind him, and looked to see the assembled lords mutter to themselves, I accept the bastard's duel. When I beat you, bastard, you will apologize. We shall meet with swords at his grace's pleasure. You are mistaken, sir. An honor duel is not fought with swords. Is that not right, Sir Barristan? Jon said. Aye, lad, you speak the truth. An honor duel is fought as knights fight, a joust. Sir Barristan said. The king looked at him as if to say, Are you sure about this? And Jon shrugged and laughed. The king couldn't help but join in laughing loudly. Very well, before the final of the joust we shall have an honor duel. Let it be known the loser shall apologize to the winner, or risk the wrath of the king. The king said loudly, Your grace, Edmure said, turning to leave. Your grace, Jon said, and the king smiled at him. Good luck, lad, the king said as he dismissed him. He turned to see Jaime glowering at him. Lorzo was smiling beamingly, a joust for honor fitting right into the chivalry his friend loved. He whistled and Ghost jumped up and they made their way towards Tyrion and Jerion and the Northers who now blocked his path. He nodded to Ghost and looked at Smozian, the wolf immediately jumping up and knocking the large Northman to the ground, much to Daisy's enjoyment. "What were you thinking, Jon? You should have just apologized." Yannier said angrily. "He insulted my mother, my lord. Insulted my father. No way in hell. I'll apologize to him." "Adjust, Jon. It's too dangerous, and even if it was not, you may still lose." But think of what it'll be like if I win. Think of the story, my lord." "Forget it, Jon. You should not be so careless." "Careless, Jeremy? I thought it was being bold." Jon said and looked as Jeremy seemed to finally understand. Tyrion... Sitting in the crowd as the melee was about to begin, Tyrion thought over the conversation he had with Jon. He had been impressed to find that even after what had occurred in the throne room, the boy had quickly moved on. When he had come to him to discuss a deal involving the Mormonts, Tyrion was surprised that he hadn't thought of it first. A West Coast alliance would serve them well. Of course there were hurdles to be navigated. Jon had made it clear that it would require some investment on their part to get things started. But the idea itself was one that deemed such an investment necessary. The Eastern Coast deal with the Manderleys had been a great boon to them. But there was more room for expansion in Essos than they could handle without hurting them in Westeros. Until now, using the Mormonts in Bear Island for the Westeros trade would allow them to expand further east. The potential was extraordinary. He knew Jon had wanted to help his fellow Northmen, and if that was all this was, he may still have gone along with it. They owed the boy after all. It seemed, though, that Jon had a gift for logistics, that along with his knowledge of the North allowed him to see something that Tyrion had not. If it made them even half what they did with the expansion to the east, then it was more than worth it. He looked to the king and Jon Arryn then and smirked. Had he not been in the throne room himself, he wouldn't have believed the story of what Jon had said and done. "What are you smirking about?" Gerion asked. "Just thinking about Jon earlier in the throne room," he said, and Gerion laughed. "He was something, wasn't he?" Gerion said proudly. I think he may have spent too much time around us, Uncle. We're rubbing off on him," Tyrion said, laughing loudly. "Good," Gerion said emphatically. Tyrion turned to see his aunt enter with the children, Joy holding a bag of something in her hand, which all of the others seemed to have also. "Papa?" Joy said, running from his aunt. "Hello, Princess. Where were you?" Gerion said, grabbing his daughter and placing her on his lap. "Auntie took us, Jon, then pen nuts." The girl said, holding a bag of peanuts in her hand. "Peanuts, Joy?" Gerion said with a smile. "Pen nuts, yummy, Papa," the little girl said, smiling as she popped one into her mouth. "Aunt, you look tired," Tyrion said. "Children, Tyrion, children," Jenna said as she sat down. Tyrion motioned to one of his cupbearers to give his aunt some wine, which she took gratefully. Her boys and Kevin sat down, the boys all holding bags of peanuts and looking eagerly out as the melee got ready to start. Jon and Loras, he assumed, were watching from the wings, both boys getting some last-minute sparring in before the duels began. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, men and women of King's Landing and the Seven Kingdoms, in honor of his grace's glorious victory over the dragons, we hereby welcome you to the tourney of King's Landing and to the first event, the melee," the herald said, and the competitors bowed to the king. Tyrion watched on as the melee began, swords clashing, maces being swung. He looked to see the king, almost itching to be out there himself, while beside him his sister, the queen, looked bored and spite-filled as usual. Had anything happened to Jon today, Tyrion felt his sister would not be long for this world. The looks Jaime gave her in the throne room left no room for interpretation. When she interjected, Tyrion thought Jaime would attack her there and then, such was the anger his brother showed. Jaime was so annoyed that he refused to come to the melee. Tyrion had actually offered to stay with his brother back at the manse, but Jaime told him one of them was needed to represent their house. When Cersei had seen his brother was not here, she gave him a look of contempt and disgust. Tyrion, though, just smiled back at her. Long past was the time when he cared what his sister thought. "So who'd you bet on?" Gerion asked, forcing Tyrion's attention back to the melee. "I went with Jon's suggestion and put some coin on the Hound." "Hey, me too. I had thought Thoros would be his choice again, but the man's sickness took care of that. Maybe Jon hobbled him." Tyrion japed, and they both laughed. "Why didn't the mountain come?" "I've no idea, Uncle. Hadn't even known he wasn't here until today. It's surprising, is it not?" It is." "Well, it's one less headache for us," Gerion said. "Ouchie, Papa," Joy said, pointing at the man the large northern woman had just cracked over the head with a mace. Jaime laughed at his daughter, and she threw a peanut at him, which he caught in his mouth, much to her delight. Jaime found he didn't really care for the melee, for some reason. Why the king had changed the natural order he had no idea, but it was standard to do the archery first. He looked on as the northern woman and a large northern man took out another 2 opponents. Even though the melee was getting down to the interesting parts, as both his brother and no doubt the king would call it, Tyrion found himself more interested in the crowd than the fighting. He had already received the first reports from Aling, some of which he knew already. The tension growing between the Tyrells and the Crown Prince's behavior, but 1 or 2 things had caught him by surprise. The rumor of the Master of Coin and the Hand's wife seemed more than likely to be true, given how much happier the woman looked with the slimy man beside her than she ever did when with her husband. The man's rapid rise through the ranks, no doubt helped by both the Hand and his wife's patronage. Elaine's notes that the man was most likely an embezzler interested him also. Finding out who was sleeping with who and which house was plotting against which house to Tyrion seemed more a battlefield he could compete on, which perhaps was why his brother liked fighting so much. Down to the final 4, Tyrion. Jaime said, "Lozier us." He didn't know whether to be angry at, proud of, or scared for his friend. Some of what Jon had done and said in the throne room had made him feel each of those emotions. In the end, he probably felt relieved more than anything. When they had suggested taking Jon's hand, he'd felt so scared that he couldn't see a way out of it. He had thought that was it. There was no way they'd allow Jon to just walk out of there, not if they were threatening him with the loss of his hand. But watching Jon speak, listening to what he said, he almost broke out in a smile before realizing the seriousness of what was going on. Instead, he composed himself like Lord Jaime had shown him and schooled his face as best he could. Once it was over and he realized that Jon would be facing Lord Tully in a joust, he couldn't wait to see it happen, to see whether or not his friend could beat the fish. He listened as Lord Jaime gave Jon a piece of his mind and watched as Jon defended himself. Eventually, Lord Jaime reluctantly accepted, but he had left them to their own devices and didn't accompany them to the melee. "Pay attention, Loras, or else the next time I'll follow through on the swing," Jon said, holding his sword to his arm. "Sorry I was elsewhere," Loras said, coming back to the spar at hand. The 2 boys continued their warm-up, neither really giving it their all, but still trying to make up for their missed time that morning. Jon had had his early morning spar with Lord Jaime, something Lord still wasn't a part of, though Lord Jaime did give him a private spar later each day. But both boys had wanted to both spar earlier and to work on teamwork for the melee, feeling that, barring a really bad draw, they'd both make it that far. "Well, we're done," Jon said as he once again held his sword to Lora's arm. "You better pay attention during the duels, otherwise I'll be fighting in the melee all alone." Jon said only half seriously, "Come on, the melee will start soon. Perhaps that will help clear up my head," Loras said. "Aye, though since your head's empty anyway, do we really need it to be cleared up?" Jon Japp and Loras took a swing at him with his sword. The 2 boys laughed as they walked to the side of the training area, the competitors for the melee all getting ready to enter and be introduced to the crowd. Loras had put his coin on the Hound after Jon had convinced him that with Thoros out there was no one to beat the man. He had initially wanted to back Rosin Storm, having seen the man in the training area and seen just how big and strong he was, but in the end had gone with Jon's idea after Jon pointed out that while he may match the Hound's size and strength, he was far slower. "Good luck, Dacian. Try and bring Small Jon back in one piece," Jon said, and the large Northman glared at him. "You're lucky I'm too old for the duels, Snow. Otherwise I'd put you on your arse." Small Jon said, laughing, I suppose I'd just have to call Ghost again," Jon said, and the large man paled as the White Wolf suddenly appeared. "Keep that fucker away from me. He's not right," Small Jon said as Daisy slapped him on the head. "Good luck to you both, the North remembers," Jon said loudly. "The North remembers," they shouted back. Loziertz watched on as the competitors were introduced. He could feel both his and Jon's excitement building. One day they too would be taking part in a full-on proper melee. Until then, they could pick up some tips which may help them in their own one. They found a nice spot where they could sit and see clearly and waited for it to begin. Watching as the first competitors were defeated and seeing them come back, it suddenly dawned on Loras that the melee seemed to have much different rules than the duels. Where there was points or yield, here, though, yielding seemed an option. It was much more likely you would be too hurt to continue. "Is that what our melee will be like?" he turned to ask Jon. "I don't know. I suppose it will be a little like that, depends on the king," Jon shrugged. I thought it'd just be the same as the duels. You know, a yield, Loras said. Aye, perhaps it will. Won't matter, though. As long as we stick together, we'll be fine, Jon said, smiling. He nodded and looked back to the melee. The different weapons fascinated him. He and Jon had trained in most, but both concentrated on the sword. As he watched, he could see some weapons had advantages and disadvantages. Daisy Mormont wielded a blunted, lighter version of the mace Jon said her family were known for. She was as dangerous a foe with it as he or Jon were with a sword. Had he not known Jon, he would probably have mocked at the idea of a woman warrior. But his friend said the Mormont ladies were as fierce as any man, and the she-bears of Bear Island were widely feared and hugely respected in the north. Watching as Daisy cracked skull after skull with her mace, Loras could do nothing but agree. Watch this, Jon said as Daisy, with her mace and Small Jon, wielding a greatsword, one-handed, moved towards Lord Jan Royce. Lord Yames and his eldest son, Andar, had made the mistake of thinking two northern savages, one of whom was a woman, were no match for the famed Knights of the Vale. Before they even had a chance to attack, the Northmen and woman were upon them. Andar making the error of smiling at Daisy and thinking a woman would be flattered, an error he'd not soon forget, as he was now lying on the ground, barely conscious, while Daisy and Smaugjon attacked his father. Lords couldn't help but smirk. They were playing with the man, toying with him. Daisy would occupy him for a moment before stepping back, and then Smaugjon would begin. He watched as Lord Yang tired, the two younger warriors wearing him down. A hard strike from Smaugjon almost costing the Lord his head. Within moments it was over. Daisy's mace catching the Lord's arm and loosing him his sword. "I yield," Lord Yane said, looking humbled as his son began to come around. "Well met, Lord Yais," Daisy said with a small curtsy, and Loras almost guffawed. Something he did, but a moment later, "Who's next to face Goatsbane?" Small Jon bellowed. Marguerite couldn't wait until this day was over. Each part of it had gone from bad to worse. From seeing Jon in trouble and worrying about him, although at least that mostly turned out all right. She would, however, be certain to speak to him and chastise him for risking himself in a joust of all things. That had been bad enough, but given what had happened earlier that day, this was turning into one of the most trying she could ever remember. She had been invited to break her fast with the prince and queen. Her grandmother was delighted. She, however, was not. The night before had been a horrible experience. Every moment she'd spent with the prince was one she hated. From his inane boasting, to his snide comments, to his put-downs of Jon and his laughing at her brother, the prince proved himself a horrible person, and this morning had shown just how horrible he really was. She walked through the corridors, her escort leading her to the small private dining area where she'd break her fast with Joffrey and the queen. As she passed what she assumed to be one of the royal children's rooms, given the king's guards standing outside, she could hear crying and a voice asking someone to stop. She moved to the door only for the king's guard to block her way. As she did so, she heard a girl's voice and could make the words out more clearly. "Ouch. Sorry, Joff. Sorry, please. Sorry," a little girl cried. Marguerite turned to the king's guard and looked beseechingly at him, the man's pockmarked face looking as concerned as hers. "Perhaps, sir, if his grace knew I was here, he may care to accompany me to break our fast," Marjorie said, and the king's guard nodded. "I shall inform his grace," he said, and turned to enter the room. Following after him, Marguerite was disgusted to see Joffrey standing over a small girl and boy. Both were crying, but the girl was especially upset as Joffrey tore the head off a rather beautiful doll. As she looked around the room, she could see other broken toys, and the look on the prince's face was one of absolute glee. "I told you both to stay away from my room. Now you'll see what happens, you useless little fucks." "Joffrey! Sorry, Sarah Pickles. We looked for Sarah Pickles," the girl said, tears falling from her eyes. "You're lucky I didn't find the damn ugly cat. When I do, I'll skin the fucker." "Your Grace, Lady Marjorie, is outside. She was wondering if perhaps you'd like to accompany her to break your fast with her and your mother," the Kingsguard said. "Tell the damn flower to wait her damn turn. It's not like she'll wilt without me, is it?" Joffrey said, laughing loudly. "Of course, Your Grace. Perhaps, though, you should. Are you telling me what to do, you pockmarked freak?" Joffrey turned to look at the Kingsguard, and Marguerite stepped back to the door so as not to be seen. "Of course not. Your Grace, I was just saying your mother invited Lady Marjorie herself." "Very well, I'll deal with these two later. Women useless things, the lot of them," Joffrey said, and turned to walk out the door. Marguerite hurried back outside to where her guards were waiting. She composed herself, and a few moments later, Joffrey arrived. My lady, I'd be honored to accompany you to break our fast, he said, and the false smile on his face made her stomach turn. Closing her eyes to try and dismiss the memory, she shuddered as the prince turned to speak to her, his sickly sweet face and voice doing nothing to make her forget the true face she'd seen that morn. My lady, are you enjoying the melee? He said, smiling at her. I am, your grace. It's terribly exciting, is it not? She smiled back at him, and out of the corner of her eyes saw her grandmother watching them. When I'm old enough, I'll be sure to do for them all, both here and in the list. The prince gloated. Are you not old enough for the duels, your grace? I believe Jon Snow won when he was but 6 named days. Margaery said coyly. The bastard, you dare compare me to a bastard. Joffrey angrily said loud enough that people around could hear. Of course not, your grace. I was just wondering if you would take part in the duels. Marjorie said, trying her best to look abashed and not smile as large on the outside as she was inside. My mother would never allow me to compete against such unworthy foes. Joffrey said, trying to sound nonchalant. Of course, your grace. Margaery smiled, allowing Joffrey to think his answer. The cause of it. She turned to watch as the final 4 competitors readied themselves on the melee field, smirking to herself as she imagined Jon landing hit after hit on the prince. She wondered if she asked him would he go especially hard on the pompous prince, would he hit him in the places it would hurt the most. While the image brought her some respite, she knew it was just a dream. The coward beside her would never face Jon in a battle. The outcome would be more than his pride would allow. Jaime, the bold indeed of all the stupid, senseless, ridiculous notions he'd ever heard, the one coming from his king, had to be the worst one ever. Think of the story. The story. He was thinking of his damn safety, and the king wanted the story to be told. He understood. Of course. The moment he'd mentioned the bold, it became clear to him, but he liked it not, and had he a way to stop it, he would. While his king may see himself as Barristan, he'd soon find that Edmure Tully was no Prince Duncan. Not only was the man a poor jouster, but after this morning Jaime believed the man not only a fool, but a dishonorable one too. He had lied continuously while facing the king, had deliberately provided no evidence for what he said, because Jaime had no doubt he couldn't get a lord to lie for him. Why Jon had not just had he and Laura speak, he knew not, but it irked him, and he had been in a foul mood ever since. He admired his king standing up for his principles, admired him even more so for defending his family. How he used Robert's feelings for his uncle to manipulate the king was a thing of beauty, but a joust was no place for a boy, no matter if it started Barristan's legend or not. So he refused to go to the melee and instead was now standing waiting for Master Mott in his shop. My lord, how can I help you? I hope there were no issues with your equipment. The man asked. No, as usual, the workmanship was extraordinary, Master Mott. Jaime smiled. Flattery and gold were always the way to the Corac's good graces. Is there something else you need, my lord? The man's eyes gleaming at the potential profit. Aye, there is. I need a suit of armor and a shield. But not for me, for my squire, the dark-haired lad you made the sword for. A boy's armor. For what use, my lord? Ceremonial, fighting or joust. Jousting, I need it done quickly, but of the same standard as mine own. Can you manage it, Master Mott? A strange request, my lord, but surely the boy's not jousting. I don't think I could allow my work be used for such a thing. Why the boy's loss could reflect upon me. The man shook his head. No, not in the actual joust itself, master. The boy will be taking part in a single joust, an honor duel. Should he win, then your work would no doubt be spoken of for years to come. Yama said and noticed the gleam reappear. But should he lose, my lord? Have you ever heard how Ser Barristan got his epithet, Master Modern? Jaime said, and the smith smiled. After leaving the blacksmith shop lighter by a lot of coin, and with the knowledge that the smith would be sending his apprentice to the manse to measure Jon for his armor and to take the design for the shield, Jaime gave in and headed to the melee. Upon arriving, he quickly made his way to his uncle and brother, stopping to glare at his sister when she smiled at him. Sitting down, he turned to Joy, who held a peanut in her hand, and offered it to him. Peanut, cousin Jaime. Why, thank you, my lady, Jaime said with an over-exaggerated bow, getting a laugh from the girl. What have I missed? He turned to his brother. We're down to the final 4, 2 northerners, a Mormont lady, and the large giant man, Small John, a Stormlander, Roland Storm, and the Hound, Tyrion said as Jaime looked out to the field. He was surprised to see the northerners had made it this far. Jon had told him all about Ser Jorah's family, so the fact one of the infamous she-bears could fight was not a surprise, but making it to the final 4, each of the 2 who were knocked out now would still receive 1,000 gold dragons. Robert's extravagance knowing no bounds. With the runner-up receiving 5,000 and the winner 10,000, there was a big incentive to win the thing, so he expected most put in their best showing. He looked out as the large Northman, the small Jon had told him he was called. His father was even bigger and called the Great Jon, much to Tyrion's amusement, faced off against a man who was actually bigger than him in the Hound. While to the other side, Roland Storm faced Daisy Mormont, her mace to his shield and longsword. He watched excitedly as the battles began, the Hound and the small Jon's blades meeting fiercely, the sound reverberating across the grounds. "So who's my coin on?" Jaime asked, having left the betting to Tyrion. "We're all in the same boat, brother. Should the Hound fall, so shall we." Tyrion japed and offered him some wine, which he took. "Why'd we put our coin on Clegane now?" "Now wait, this another of Jon's ideas," he said, laughing. "Aye, the boy's a damn prodigy when it comes to the betting ring. Come on, Clegane, my girl wants a present," Tyrion said. Present Papa Joy turned to look at her father. "Aye, after Jon and Loras' fights, we'll go get some presents, Princess," Tyrion said, and Joy threw him a peanut, which he caught in his mouth, yet again. Jaime laughed and turned back to watch the fighting. The small Jon and the Hound were in full swing, the Northman's greatsword allowing him extra reach. But the Hound was well used to fighting against such a blade, having spent all his life pretty much training should he get the chance to face his brother truly. He watched as the Hound ducked and dodged. Then as he moved inside the small Jon's guard, the Hound finally began to work. The blows he caught the Northman with would have stopped a damn elephant, let alone a man. Yet the Northman continued to fight on. Eventually, though, it proved far too much for the younger, less experienced man, and Jaime watched as a blow took him from his feet and knocked him hard to the ground. "I yield," Small Jon said as the Hound helped him back up. The man patted the Hound on the back and made his way to the back. As Yara looked to the other fight, Daisy was more than holding her own, but most of her blows hit the shield of Roland. His, however, did not, and when she, after being hit in the arm, missed her counter, it was over. Roland moved quickly, his shield catching her in the chest, his foot tripping her up, and when she fell, she yielded quickly. He too, like the Hound before him, helped up his defeated opponent, and she nodded and smiled at the man before making her way to the back also. Jaime watched as the two large men paced around each other, Roland smirking all the while. "Are you just gonna stand there with that stupid grin on your face, or are we gonna fight or what?" the Hound said as Roland's face changed into a grimace and he attacked. The two men were tired, both had received more than one hit that day. Yet to look at them, you'd never know it. Jaime watched to see where their weaknesses lay. Technically, both were pretty even, as they were strength-wise. But the Hound had the man for speed, and that would prove to be decisive. Jaime watched as they parried the opening blows. He watched as, with a stunning riposte, the Hound knocked the shield from Roland's hand. Now, with both men only holding swords, the only chance Roland had of winning was lost. It took a while, but the Hound's faster strikes, his quicker movement, allowed for him to land more hits. Finally, the winning blow came, and when it did, Yenye was glad to be a spectator. The Hound, after Roland had missed, swung and caught him so hard and so true that Roland Storm was knocked almost 5 feet away from him. It would not be a yield that won this fight. The man was out cold. Jaime watched surprised as the Hound went to the other man, before he called for people to come out to help. Taking water from them, he sprinkled some to wake the man up, which after a while he did. The large man came to coughing and spluttering. Luckily, there was no blood, but at best his ribs would be bruised badly. The man nodded at the Hound and he helped him to his feet. "Your graces, my lords and ladies, men and women of King's Landing and the realm, I give you the winner of the melee, the Hound Sandor Clegane." Jaime and his family clapped along with everyone else. He had no idea how much Tyrion had bet. But judging by the smile on Tyrion's face, he felt his uncle had bet a lot. He looked to his aunt, who shook her head before laughing. Suddenly feeling the need to relieve himself, he got up and motioned to Tyrion. He'd be back in a moment, heading to look for a privy. He was walking back from doing his business when he smelt it, the wafting air of cloying perfume. It was a smell he remembered well from his time in King's Landing, but one he had not missed. Turning, he saw the silken robes and the egg-shaped head, the sickly smile on the man's face as he moved towards him. "Lord Yenin, Lord Varys," Jaime said as the spider smiled. Jon, stepping out into the tourney grounds for the first duel. Jon couldn't help but compare the setup to that at Lannisport. There Jaime had built a ready-made arena. Here it was simply a fenced-off section outside the city itself. While Jon actually in some ways appreciated the open feel of the place, he preferred the arena in Lannisport. There the crowd felt part of the event. Here they seemed oddly removed. They also didn't seem that interested in the early duels. However, as Jon faced his opponent, something seemed to change in the crowd. Excited, hushed whispers were heard, and people moved forward to get a look at him. Jon knew word had spread of what had occurred between him and Edmure, and he welcomed it. Jaime had thought him early on that being known was helpful. So Jon intended to make a show for those watching. Unfortunately, his opponent wouldn't be much help for that. Across from him stood one of the multitudes of Freys who'd come to the tourney in the melee. There had been almost 12 of them, and all but one had been beaten without defeating an opponent. The one who had actually managed to beat somebody only did so because the Hound had practically beaten him for him. The boy facing Jon was yet another Walder. He shuddered to think just how many of them there were. "You ready to taste defeat, bastard?" Walder said, and Jon sighed. Why is it the least talented are always the loudest? He wondered as he readied his sword. Jon moved quickly. The thin sword flashed in a feint, and then it was over. 2 hits, one to the sword hand and one to the arm, and the fray was yielding. Jon turned to the crowd and shrugged his shoulders, much to their amusement, giving the laughs and cheers he got. He walked to the back, and when he got there, he saw Loras smirking from the sidelines. "Seriously, you got a damn face," Loras yapped.
"I know, what are you up?"
"The fight after next. I'm fighting a Fossaway," Lozier said, and Jon noticed something off in his voice. "Loras? Oh, what? It's nothing." "Loras? It's just that Garland's been spending a lot of time with the Fossaways. I think Father sees a match for him there." Loras said sadly, "I'm sure your brother would have come if he could." "Loras, now go out and beat your future good sister's skin," Jon said, and Loras smiled. The 2 boys waited together until Loras was called. Jon walked with him to the entrance. "Remember, don't be too flash, Loras. Win, then show off." Jon said, and Loras nodded. He watched as his friend went out to face his opponent. The Fossaway lad had him beat in size. But Jon knew Loras would beat him as long as he reined in his tendency to show off. Both he and Jaime had repeatedly told Loras it was a fault that would cause him problems if he didn't get it under control. Jon had gone so far as to say that he should use all the build-up and after a match for showing off, but be completely serious during one. Loras had seemed to listen and had improved tremendously. But this was the first real test. Jon had not been able to go to the tourney at Highgarden, so didn't know if Loras took the lessons to heart there. Here, though, he would get the chance to find out, and he looked to see Jaime up in the crowd, watching intently. Also, should Loras still show the same traits, both he and Jaime would be clear to show their disappointment to him. Something he knew his friend would respond to. In the end, though, it appeared all his worries were for nothing. Loras beat the Fossaway 5-1. The one hit the other boy managed to get on him was one that even Jon would have had trouble avoiding. He smiled as Loras came back through the entrance, patting his friend on the back. They walked together to get him something to drink. "You were good out there," Jon said, and was happy to see Loras' smile. I need to be. "This time you're getting beat, Jon," Loras said, and Jon just shook his head, laughing. The 2 boys continued to mess around and jape with each other. They mock sparred, but really they were just killing time. There would be 2 more matches for each to face, in order to qualify for the melee, which was tomorrow. Both had looked and identified those they felt would be the toughest opponents. Waymore Royce just barely managed to sneak under the age limit and would be a tough opponent, though not as hard as his brother would have been. There was also a couple of boys from the Riverlands that Jon had caught looking at him earlier. No doubt the fish had put them up to going after him if given the chance. There were 2 other lads from the Vale, Mitchell Redfort, who Jon had seen during the tourney of Lannisport, and Harold Harding, who was related to Jon Arryn, who were talented, but for Jon the biggest threat seemed to come from the large blonde from Tarth, someone that Jon was certain was a girl, though she had disguised herself so she would not appear one. She was at least a foot taller than he and Loras and broader than either. But it was her skill with a sword which impressed Jon. She wielded her longsword as well, and almost as quickly as he did his thinner one. How she had managed to fool everyone he didn't know, but he was of the North, a land where warrior women were welcomed and appreciated, so it would not be Jon who raised an objection. He hoped and prayed that no one else would either. "You're up! Did you bribe the judges, Jon?" Loras asked, raising an eyebrow. "What?" Jon said, laughing as he looked at his opponent. "Wonder if this one's named Walder as well." Loras said, and Jon shook his head. He walked out to face his second fray of the day. This one was not named Walder, though he may as well have been, and just looking at him, Jon could have sworn he was facing the same boy he'd already beaten. Could that be it? Was that the hidden secret of House Frey? Was there really not a large brood of weasels, but just one of each age who pretended to be many? Jon felt himself smile and readied himself for the fight to begin. Walking back towards Loras barely a moment later, he could see his friend almost falling to the ground in laughter. One solitary hit he'd gotten on the fray before he yielded. We stand together indeed. They'd have to. They certainly didn't stand apart. Jon was frustrated. 2 victories were fine and everything, but he hadn't actually done anything. During this fight, the crowd hadn't even bothered to laugh. It was over that quickly. Quantity certainly doesn't breed quality, does it, Jon? Lord jammed as he reached him. No, it bloody well does not, Jon said, letting his annoyance out. Cheer up, at this rate they'll be calling you Frey's Bane by the end of the duels. Lord said, and Jon couldn't help but break into laughter. Well, 2 down, 1 to go. There surely can't be another Frey, can there? I don't know, Jon, there are a damn lot of them. Lorzier said, and both boys laughed. Looking around the area, Jon saw all 3 of the Vale lads milling around together along with both of the Riverlanders. They'd all managed to win their fights. The 2 Riverlanders, Jon had found out, were a Vance and a Piper, making them brothers, or nephews, of 2 of the men he knew to be friends of Edmure. Across from them, sitting on her own, was the girl from Tarth. She had earlier been going through her forms, and Jon had been impressed, much more so than he had with any of the others. Well, wish me luck. It seems this time it's a lad from the Stormlands, Loras said. And Jon looked out to see his friend's opponent, ready and waiting for him. His attention was torn between Loras and the girl from Tarth. Luckily, Loras won rather quickly, and was back pretty soon. It seemed though his gameston had been torn in the fight. Nodding to Jon, he headed back to where they stored their things to get a new one. Giving Jon the opportunity to go speak to the girl, he walked over to her and stood in front of her for a second, before finally speaking. My lady, you are most impressive out there. It shall be an honor to face you, Jon said, wanting the girl to know that, while he knew her secret, he was fine with it. She looked at him, her expression torn between panic and anger, which emotion would win he knew not. Finally, she made a decision. I shall look forward to beating you, Jon, she said, a forced smile on her face. Confidence without talent is a waste, my lady, though you certainly do have the talent to back up your statement, Jon said, smiling and getting an even warmer one from her in return. Brienne, Jon, you can call me Brienne. Brienne, may I? Jon said, pointing to the space beside her. She nodded, and he sat down. So it doesn't bother you to see a girl fight in the duels then? She asked, staring at him. I'm from the north. Did you not see Daisy Mormont earlier? If there's a reason girls can't fight as well as boys, then I know not of it. Jon said. He watched as Brienne breathed a sigh of relief, the 2 speaking for a while, until Loras returned and Brienne stiffened beside him. Lorziers, this is Brienne. Brienne, this is Loras. Jon said, smirking when Loras' eyebrow raised. It's a pleasure to meet you, Bran, Lorzier said, and Jon watched as once again she relaxed. The 3 of them spoke and japed together, Brienne becoming more and more comfortable as the minutes passed, until finally it was time for Jon to face his final opponent of the day. He stood up and said his goodbyes to Brienne, and he and Loras walked to the entrance. Jon looked inside to see who he was facing, but couldn't see anyone there, before a big, lumbering boy bumped past him and walked out to the crowd. At least it's not another Fry, Loras said, and Jon smirked as he walked out. The lad he faced was another Riverlander, though, and as Jon swung his sword, he wondered just how he had managed to make it this far. The boy had no talent for swordplay whatsoever. He just swung his sword as hard as he could, and slow as he was, Jon could have dodged the blows with his eyes closed. With a quick movement to the left, Jon aimed 2 blows in quick succession to the boy's hand, knocking the sword from his grip. A sweep of his leg later, and the boy was on the ground, yielding to Jon's sword at his neck. He turned and headed back to Loras. He had made it to the melee, but felt no accomplishment whatsoever. Each of his opponents had been as bad as the other. He shook his head. Reaching Loras, they barely had time to talk, as his duel was up right away. Jon watched as Loras went out to fight his opponent. While not as easy as Jon's victory, Loras won 5-3, and he too had made it to the melee. Jon breathed a sigh of relief. He may not be happy how he got there, but both of them had, and in the end that was all that matters. Well, looks like an early night for us tonight. He japped as Loras came up to him. Easy for you to say, I'm having dinner with my family. Loras Yerd, you'll come, won't you? It's a family dinner, Loras. I'd love to come, but your family obviously want time to themselves, Jon said, and he was speaking the truth. The thoughts of dinner with Marguerite, Loras and their family was appealing, but he had not been invited, so he knew it was a family-only occasion. Your family too, Jon, Loras said, and Jon smiled before patting him on the shoulder. You too, Loras, now, as your family, go now and eat with the rest of them, Jon said, laughing. They messed around for a few more moments before Brienne walked over to head out for her match. Jon and Loras nodded and wished her luck, not that she needed it as she absolutely demolished the poor boy she faced. With her victory, the melee field was now complete. Jon and Loras, Brienne, the 2 Riverlanders, and the 3 lads from the Vale had all made it. I wish you good fortune for the morrow, Brienne, Jon said as he and Loras bid their farewells. You too, Jon, Loras, Brienne said, turning to leave. Tyrion. Tyrion sat at his desk in his office, Tyrion sitting with him. Jaime had gone with Loras to speak to Lady Olenna and Lord Mace and inform them of their trip north. The duels had left them all, apart from Jon, in high spirits. Tyrion had laughed at the lad when he was annoyed he'd faced so little competition, telling him he'd need all his energy for the morrow anyway, that the melee was a different beast altogether, something his aunt had agreed on. She was still not happy that he and Loras were taking part at all. Jaina, Aemon and the children had met up with Kevin, and they'd all gone to welcome the Lion's Roar to dock before heading out for rest of the day. The second Pinnacle ship had been diverted here before heading to White Harbor, as it would now be taking Jaime, Loras, and Jon north also. After the events in the throne room, Jaime was now even more eager to show both ships off to send a clear message to the crown. Mess with us at your peril. Jon had gone to the inn the Northers were staying in, to both congratulate Daisy and Smajan on their performances and to escort Ser Jorah and his lady wife here for their meeting. He'd spoken to him about the offer to the Umbers, and Tyrion had made a few small changes to the terms. But still they were more than favorable, and he assumed the Northern Lord would be amenable to them. Lord Tyrion, your guests have arrived. Show them in Lara, Tyrion said to the blonde. This way, my lord, my lady, Lara said, and showed Ser Jorah and Lady Linnaeus into the room. Tyrion and Jerion both rose and offered them a seat, his uncle looking confused at Jon's absence. Is Jon not with you? Jerion asked. Aye, he is, my lord. He just went to fetch the wolf some food. He had a torrid time keeping it under control when we left the inn. Ser Jorah set a smile on his face. I apart from him enjoy. Ghost doesn't heed anyone. Jerion said with a smirk. Joy, my lord? Lady Linnaeus asked. My daughter Joy Hill. She and Jon are very fond of each other, Jerion said. Come now, uncle. It's more than that. Jon's basically her big brother at this point. My lady, Tyrion said, getting a sweet smile from Linnaeus. My lords, my lady, Jon said as he entered the room. Ghost all right, Jon, Jerion asked. Hungry little sod. A whole leg of lamb I fed him this morn, and still he wanted to rush off and eat from the stalls. Sooner the better. We're off in the north and he can hunt for himself, Jon said as he walked to stand behind Tyrion. You're going north, Jon? Ser Jorah asked. I, Ser Jorah, Lord Jaime. Loras and I are going to White Harbor and then on to visit my uncle at the Wall before heading to Winterfell. Once the tourney is finished, actually I had completely forgotten to ask Ser. Ask Jon. Ser Jorah looked at him. Well, I'm not sure how you plan on traveling home. Saxar, so I asked Lord Jaime and he agreed. If you would like, then perhaps you, Lady Linnaeus, and the rest of the northern party could join us on the Lion's Roar. It would cut down travel time and you could travel back to Bear Island from either White Harbor or Castle Black, whichever is easiest. Ser Jorah looked at his wife and she smiled before he turned back to Jon. Aye, that sounds like a fine idea, lad. I could visit my father and introduce him to my wife and then travel from there. We'd cut down the travel home by many moons. I'll speak to the others, but I know Daisy and Smaljun will be fine with it, as I'm sure Ser Wendell and the Karstarks will also, Jorah said. Excellent. You'll find the Pinnacle ships a much more pleasant way to travel, my lady, Tyrion said. Now, to business. Jon reached over and got the glasses and bottle of wine. He poured out Tyrion and Jyrion's before doing the same for Lady Linnaeus and Ser Jorah. Then placing the bottle back down, he reached over to the shelf and took the book down, which showed their Westeros trade in wood and furs, and handed it to Tyrion. Currently, we import wood, furs, and sundries from House Manderley, and what we don't use ourselves we distribute through the West and beyond. Lately, though, we've been unable to fully keep up with demand in the East. What Jon proposed to me was that you could not only help us with the demand from your own stocks, but could also serve as a sort of base for supplies from other northern houses. They would deliver to you and we'd take it on from there. Tyrion said, "Aye, that's what Jon said to us also." Jorah said, "To do this would require an expansion of the docks to allow pinnacle ships to dock. It would also require a secure area where supplies could be left, and I've also heard that you wish us to deliver foodstuff and other products from the Reach to you also," Tyrion asked. "Aye, that's true, though. The cost of the expansion of the docks, the building of a secure area is something that, at the moment, we are not able to cover," Jorah said, and Tyrion smirked at the look his wife gave him. "Jon, do you have the 2 sets of figures? Thanks," he said as Jon handed them to him before he finished speaking. "Our Westerosi trade, should you cover it, totals 200,000 gold dragons a year," Tyrion said, watching as Jorah gulped and Lady Lynesse looked on calculatingly. "How much of that would we stand to make, my lord?" Lady Lynesse asked. "Jon?" he said, turning to the boy. "My lady, that's your end of the trading figure. That's what we'll be paying you after expenses and costs. You should clear at least 3/4 of that, so around 150,000 a year, give or take." "Surely you jest, Jon," Sir Jorah said, shaking his head in disbelief. "No, sir. Given the demand for wood, the need for furs, let alone should we find a market for other items, I'd say the minimum return would be that amount. Wouldn't you agree, my lord?" Jon said, looking at Tyrion. "Aye, I would. But what other items?" Tyrion asked, wondering what Jon was speaking about. "I was thinking, my lord. Bear Island lies in the Bay of Ice. My lord, I have some ideas I wish to speak to you on once I return from the north. There are some things I need to check first," Jon said, and Tyrion looked on, intrigued, as did Sir Jorah. "Very well, Jon. I'm interested to see what else you come up with," Tyrion said. "Now where were we? Yes, the building work. Jon told me that labor is cheaper in the north than south is. That true, Sir Jorah?" I'd imagine so. Probably half the cost given the more expensive prices you have here," Jabber said, laughing. "Is stone a problem, my lord? Does Bear Island have stone, or would it need to bring some in?" "Stone. We have, my lord. That we have in plenty." Good, Jon removed the stone and slashed the labor costs in half," Tyrion said, and Jon frantically scribbled away before handing him a piece of parchment. "You sure about this, Jon?" Tyrion said, and Jon nodded. "Very well, we estimate it'll cost 100,000 gold dragons to build the docks, a small keep, and a large enclosed space to store both food and the wood and furs." Ser Jorah gulped, but Lady Lynesse smiled. "As per Jon's request, we're prepared to cover these costs with an interest-free loan, which you can pay off at 10,000 gold dragons per year from the first year you receive payment from us, or, should you wish, you can at any point pay off the balance," Tyrion said, and both Ser Jorah and Lady Lynesse looked shocked. "Aye, my lord. I don't know what to say. We thank you and look forward to doing business with your family in the future," Jorah said as Jon poured each of them another glass of wine. When they finished the wine, Jon escorted Ser Jorah and Lady Lynesse out of the room, both of them seeming incredibly pleased by the turn of events. It took a few moments for Jon to come back, and when he did, he sat down in front of the desk, a large smile on his face. "Thank you for that, my lord. You didn't need to give them an interest-free loan," Jon said. "Aye, probably not, Jon, but this will be a big benefit to us. No point starting off on the wrong foot, and besides, you wrote it down as a suggestion. This was your idea, lad. Really, you should be getting paid in coin by us for it," Tyrion said, looking at the boy. "I don't want it, my lord," Jon said, shaking his head. "I know, which is why I have no problem with giving it to the Mormonts. They'll take it after all. And you're right, you know, it will do us good and set us off on a major footing with them," Tyrion said. "Now what was this other idea you had, Jon?" Tyrion asked. "Ice, my lord," Jon said as both of them looked at him in confusion. Olenna. After sitting down to dinner with her family, Olenna made her way back to her rooms. The last few days were troubling to say the least. Every piece of information, every time she took a step forward, it felt like the world was conspiring against her. The business with Jon Snow gave her pause. Seeing him put the fish in his place at the feast had been fun to watch. What had been going through the man's head trying to attack a boy she'll never know? Her grandson had been right there too. Had he laid a hand on him, she'd have fixed the fish herself. Jon Snow did that for her, though, and she very much enjoyed seeing it. However, what she saw the next day was something she had thought never to see, as long as the stag was on the throne. She was appalled to see that after his disgraceful actions the night before, not only was Edmure Tully unrepentant, but he was seeking to have the boy maimed for his own actions. Watching on as the boy, though, not only showed no fear of the potential outcome, but seemed to relish the change to put the fish in his place. Yet again had been something she would remember for a very long time. To then add even more insult to Tully's injured pride, Jon Snow went one step further. To see someone stand in front of the Stag King and defend the Targaryens was incredible. For years no one dared speak anything that could be attributed as love for the dragons, but there in the throne room itself, a 10-name-day-old boy put the fish in his place once again, and at the same time called him and his house out for the oath breakers. They were, for years, those houses that served Robert had lorded over the Targaryen loyalists. House Tyrell being chief among the latter, sneers and outright scorn had been directed at them, and they had to grin and bear it. But watching Jon Snow call out hypocrisy in its simplest form was an absolute delight. The boy was something else. Had she been gifted with a son like that, they'd rule the damn 7 kingdoms already. With him and Margaery tied together, there would be no limit to what they could achieve. Alas, the boy was a bastard, which ruled that out. But given the way her granddaughter spoke about the prince, even a bastard may be a better option. During dinner she had noticed both her granddaughter and grandson were quieter than usual. She waited and waited, but since no one was willing to speak, she had decided to, "So will one of you tell me what's on your minds, or am I to sit here and try to guess?" she said impatiently. "Mother, please." "I'm not thinking of anything," her son said, and she snorted. "He was speaking to the children, you silly oaf. The last thought you had in your mind flew by so quickly you never even realized it was there." "Grandmother." Margaery said, the reproaching nature of her voice surprising her, but while she admired her little rose growing a backbone, she did not like it directed at her. "Well, you gonna tell me then?" she asked as she looked directly at her granddaughter. "Fine, since you want to know. Joffrey is a monster. An absolute monster, and if you think I'm marrying him, then you're as much a monster as he is." Marjorie said loudly. Olenna gasped. Never had her granddaughter use such a tone with her. She was lost for words for a second before her Rose jumped up from her seat and ran to her, throwing her arms around her. "I'm sorry, Grandmama. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." Margaery said, tears falling from her face. "Hush, child. Hush, tell me." "Everything." She patted her Rose's back and held her tightly to her. Shaking her head at the memory, she sat down and poured herself a glass of wine. What Margaery had told her had rocked her. The boy was an absolute monster. Her granddaughter was right. Neither he nor his father respected their family, or the coin they were spending that came from them. The queen wanted to see them humiliated constantly, and given the monster her son was, growing strong or not, she was no longer sure she could allow them be tied to that family. She had thought she at least had the hand on her side, that at least a political mind such as Jon Arryn could see the benefits of her family and the crown being close. But what Loras told her had happened at the meeting with Lord Jaime, and the hand made her reevaluate that also. He asked Lord Jaime to help the crown out financially, told him it would be good for them to be closer with the crown. When Lord Jaime brought us up and questioned them, they became defensive. Grandmother. Lord Yatsmy asked why they needed his coin if they had ours. Just how much were they spending? Why should he help if they couldn't pay their debts? It was most strange, Grandmother. What else, Loras? Lord Jaime told me to tell you, Grandmother, to let you know, though I know not why. It's fine, Loras, and all else is well with you. Aye, it is, though I'm looking forward to heading north. North? What do you mean you're going north? Mace asked loudly. Lord Jaime, Jon and I are heading north after the tourney. I'll get to visit the Wall and Winterfell and see where Jon is from. Lord said happily. Olenna poured herself another glass of wine. She was never really a drinker. 1 or 2 glasses were her limit. But the headaches wouldn't go away. She needed to speak to Jaime Lannister, to speak openly and honestly, and the thoughts of it caused her distress. How long had it been since she'd spoken openly and honestly with anyone? How long had it been since she hadn't played a game of some sort? But the bad news, the setbacks, the idea that things were afoot that she was unaware of wouldn't leave her head. The only piece of actual good news she'd had today was the increased trading deal she was doing with the North. She had been pleased when Lannister and her husband had come by to negotiate increased trade. She'd even ensured they got a really good deal. When she heard then that the Lannisters were involved and that once again Jon Snow had been the one come up with some of the ideas, she'd been taken aback. Everywhere she turned it was the Lannisters and Jon Snow. From the moment he'd appeared on the scene, the Lannisters had been playing A different game to everyone else. Trade deals, gold mines, ships, and windwheels. The list was never ending, and there right at the heart of it was Jaime Lannister and Jon Snow. When she heard that she'd missed Jaime Lannister earlier, she'd nearly shouted in frustration. He had come to speak to her regarding her grandson going north, and she had been stuck elsewhere, listening to the condescension of his sister. No, she would not leave this tourney without speaking to Jaime Lannister, and once and for all finding out what the hell game they were playing. And more importantly, perhaps, was there room for one more player? Jon. After reading Joy her story and helping tuck her in, the little girl had needed both he and Tyrion to stay with her until she fell asleep. As she was not liking her new room at all, Jon headed to his own room to do some reading and get some sleep. He took the egg from the fire which had long since burned out in his absence, placed it beside him on the bed, and began to read the book he'd borrowed from Tyrion on the building of King's Landing. As he read it, he began to think someone other than maesters should write these things. Some were so dull and boring that he wondered how even someone who loved to read as much as Tyrion did could manage to get through them. Reading about how Aegon founded it and how his family had expanded it for years afterward should to Jon have been far more exciting than Maester Aegon wrote it. As it was given his tiredness, Jon was already starting to doze off. He placed the book on the shelf, undressed, and got ready to get into bed. His mind kept being filled with the idea that something about the duels was off, but try as he could, he just couldn't grasp what it was. He had been annoyed at the quality of those he fought against, with how little they had challenged him. Honestly, Jon expected the fact it was in King's Landing that the standard would be higher than the Lannis Sport tourney. But since for whatever reason he couldn't grasp it tonight, he decided to get his rest while he could. He curled up against the egg, holding it tightly against his chest. The warmth from the fire had faded, yet the egg still felt warm to him. The movements inside had become less frantic and more calm over time. It was almost soothing to him now when he felt the dragon inside move, for he was in no doubt there was life in the egg, and it wanted to be freed. Thinking of this, he fell to sleep. The hole in the wall was small, but he squeezed through it, moving swiftly across the ground. He heard the whispers around him, the voices, the clanging of metal, but he didn't care. He had to find her. He had to find her. He moved past the 2 Foots, their metal claws dripping with the lifeblood of the 2 Foots he recognized. Some of those 2 Foots had given him food. Some he had scratched when they came too close or tried to touch him. He belonged to her, only her. One of the 2 Foots tried to catch him with his metal claw, but he was too fast, too used to them for him to be caught. He kept tight to the walls after that, moving onward. Ever onward, he was close. He knew this place. She would bring him here. They would play, and she would hold him tight against her chest. There were more 2 Foots he recognized laying on the ground, eyes open but never moving. They lay still, and something in him changed. Something he had felt only once or twice in his life. He felt afraid. Would she be all right? Would she be safe here among these 2 Foots who harmed her friends? Would he make it in time? He had to. He needed to. He could take her with him, take her to hide in the places only he knew. The deep, dark places where no 2 Foots would go, where she would be safe. He was in the room now. Could smell it everywhere. Death had come to this place. He moved faster now. This was her place. But she was not here. He felt something. Then was this hope? Had she ran like he had? Had she managed to get away? He needed to know, so he searched. He passed her small bed and saw the 2 Foot she loved the most. She had been hit with the metal claws. She lay as still as those 2 Foots outside the room. He could almost hear her. Hear what she called this 2 Foot. Hear how she cried when she got hurt, and how this 2 Foot would hold her. Just like the girl would hold him. Mother, he knew that was what the girl had called the 2 Foot, though he knew not what it meant. More 2 Foots came into the room, and he ran past them as they tried to strike him with the metal claws. He ran to the other place, the place where he and the girl would play, where they would hide before the girl would jump out, yelling and making noise. Would she be there waiting? Was that where she went? He had to know. He needed to know. There were 2 Foots in the way, but he moved past them unseen. He saw her then, and he moved towards her. She was laying on the floor, her eyes open. She was as still as the others. He pushed against her as he usually did, only this time she didn't push back. She didn't smile and tell him to stop. She didn't call his name and tell him no. She just lay there. Eyes open, but she never moved. He was grabbed by a 2 Foot, his eyes looking at him as he dragged him closer. He scratched then and moved as quick as he could. He felt the pain as he got away. He felt the blood drip, the pain from his ears slowing him, though he wished to be gone from that place, to never see it again, to never see her like that. It took him time, but he finally managed to get to the safe place. He curled into a ball and lay down, the pain from his ear and its blood still flowing, yet for him all he could feel was a much deeper pain. He had been too late. He hadn't made it in time, and he knew now that he would see the girl no more. Jon woke up and almost fell from the bed in his eagerness to get away from the dream he'd just had. He couldn't even manage to stand properly, and instead fell to his knees and then crawled to the corner of the room. He curled up into a ball and began to cry. He had seen her, seen his sister, seen what they had done to her, and for the first time in his life, Jon Snow knew what it felt like to hate. Varys. He had arrived back in King's Landing a week ago, had spent his time in the shadows, watching and waiting to announce his arrival. The trip to Illyrio's had been illuminating. The boy was growing well and would make an excellent king, but there were far too many variables for Varys' liking. The two biggest of them were who he'd spent the last week watching, Jaime Lannister and Jon Snow. When his little birds had for the first time ever failed him, Varys had taken a more direct role in events in the Westerlands. He had made numerous visits, spent a considerable amount of time and energy on the place, and found out barely anything. On Jon Snow, he found a boy who was well-liked both by lords and the small folk, one who treated everyone he met politely and with respect. On Jaime Lannister, he found a lord so very different to his father, one who the small folk adored and the lords were happy, not afraid, to serve. He had tried and failed to get near the inner circle at Casterly Rock, couldn't even manage to get in with Lord Caverns in Lannisport, and his attempts at infiltrating with the servants had continually delivered no result. Each time he'd gone back, he'd found that the only servants he could get information from were not worth it. What they had to tell he already knew. How Jon Snow doted on little Joy Hill, how he bought her presents and spent so much time with her. Varys knew because he'd seen them together. Disguised as he was, he saw the boy and girl and thought nothing of it. There was nothing substantially special about the boy, to Varys' eyes. Yet each time he came back, it seemed he was proven wrong. From trade agreements to shipbuilding, the boy seemed to be involved right at the heart of everything the Lannisters did. He then thought he hit upon a piece of luck. A servant from the inner circle got ill and didn't have the money to pay for treatment. "I can help you, Oassia. I understand how expensive it is to see a healer and how little the lords care for those who work under them. I don't know, Lord Yaxley's been very good to me. It's fine, all I need is a little information." But it had backfired and he had needed to practically run for his life. From Lannisport, the girl's loyalty too tied into the Lannisters, and worse, as he found out later, it was damn Jon Snow who helped her get treatment. The boy foiling his plans without even trying, he had made one or two more subtle attempts. Had one of his little birds get close to Lancel Lannister, only for yet again the road to become blocked. It was all so tiresome. Yet he persevered. It was what he was good at, after all. Over the last 2 years, each time he received news from the Westerlands, he shuddered, not at the nature of the news itself, but simply on the basis he, like everyone else, was in the dark and he cared for it not a bit. In King's Landing, he was king, though, so when the fat stag announced a tourney, he began to plan and wait. He told everyone he would be heading to Braavos and instead snuck out into the city and waited in disguise. Let them believe the spider to be elsewhere. While there in the shadows, he spun his web and waited for the flies to land. He had leaned quite a lot this week. Learned that perhaps the Lannisters and Sura Barristan were in it together. Learned that it was Tyrion Lannister and not Jaime that seemed to be the one playing the game. He had known about the Lannisters' tavern and had tried to infiltrate it a number of times only for his little birds to return with clipped wings. So he had resorted to another plan. If he couldn't see what was happening inside, he would instead see what happened once they left. His little birds followed, and he watched and waited, and in the end, he received his rewards. Following Jon Snow to the tavern his little birds had found him, while he had been catching up on his correspondence, he had left the little room he'd rented and made his way to the house opposite and waited. Seeing Jon Snow leave, followed by Ser Barristan, a few moments later had been enlightening to say the least. Watching the way the night followed, one would almost think he was acting a Kingsguard, and that was when it hit him. He followed to the altercation with Syrupeyes and to the farce in the throne room, and after that it was as clear as day. He knew almost all now. He'd have to check to be certain, but he knew what they were up to, and he could kick himself for not knowing sooner. But what to do? Did this help him or hurt him, and if it was the latter, then how should he go about fixing it? The little girl would keep Jon Snow in line, but he abhorred harming children, and there was no way out of it if he went that route. Though should it be necessary, then he would not hesitate to do it. Just coming out and telling the king the truth would split the realm and allow for Aegon to come in, but would Aegon be accepted after the realm learned of Jon Snow's true origin? He began to worry that he would not. That one son of Rhaegar hidden and protected was one thing, trying to then pawn off another would be something the realm would not accept. He would need to speak to his friend. There were too many variables, especially given Jon Snow's friendship with the Tyrells. Should they join with the Lannisters, they'd be practically unstoppable. Even if Aegon brought Dorne on his side, they along with the Golden Company couldn't win in a straight fight, and they would not gain other allies now. Perhaps it was for the best if the boy had an accident. Simply remove a piece from the game. Yes, he thought that seemed to be the best option. He would speak to Illyrio, and they would decide. Lord Varys, will you be heading to the Malay? I think I will, Lord Mace. My son's competing. He's one of the favorites, Mace said, puffing his chest out. Aye, him and his friend, my lord. Jon, he's a good lad, always does right by my Loras, a good friend to have, Mace said, smiling. We all have friends, we do right by my lord. Varys tittered. Jon! Lorziar's knocking on his door had finally brought Jon out of the state of despair and agony he was in. The image of his sister's mutilated body was there every time he closed his eyes. How long he had sat there weeping. He knew not, but he was cold and felt as if he had been crying for hours. He shouted to Loras that he'd meet him to break his fast and place the egg back in the fire. Holding it brought him a small measure of relief. But it wasn't until Ghost arrived, while he broke his fast, that he could begin to not think of Rhaegar all the time. The young man had then come from the smith's to measure him for his armor, and when he asked what design he wanted for his shield, Jon had looked at him like he had two heads. What did he care what was on his shield, given what he'd seen the night before? He had almost snapped at the poor boy, only for Ghost to push up against him. Taking a breath and closing his eyes, Jon saw an image and asked for some parchment to draw it on. Are you sure, my lord? The boy said, laughing. Aye, I am, and I'm no lord, it's just Jon, he said to the boy. Well, Jon, this is bound to raise some eyebrows. Good, he said, handing the boy a few coppers, which the boy was most grateful for. When he'd left, Jon took another piece of parchment and began to draw yet again. The face was exactly as he'd seen it, chubby and pale, with small pig-like eyes. The sigil a black manticore on a red field, and Jon memorized them both before throwing them in the fire. He walked to Tyrion's room and found him alone, going over papers. My lord? Jon, how can I help? I was wondering, my lord, do you have a book on sigils? I'm sorry, Jon. I forgot to bring one with me. Maybe I can help, though. I do have a good memory, though, given what I just said. Perhaps I don't. Tyrion japed before his face changed back to one more serious. A black manticore on a red field, my lord. The manticore's house, Lork, but the red field's Amory's personal sigil. Amory, my lord? Amory Lork. A horrible, unpleasant man my father used to... What's this about, Jon? Tyrion said, shaking his head. Nothing, my lord. Just saw the sigil and wondered whose it was. Are you sure that's all, Jon? Tyrion asked, his concern clear. Aye, it is, I think. Maybe I'm just nervous about the melee and I'm focusing on silly stuff, my lord. Jon said, hoping his smile would reassure Tyrion and satisfy his inquisitive nature. You've nothing to be nervous of, Jon, although you do have a lot of coin on you. Tyrion japed, and this time Jon actually laughed. A few hours later, he had tried his best to put the thoughts out of his mind, had reassured both Loras and Jaime he was fine, and he and Loras had been given a talking to by Jaime about what to expect. So now standing there, facing the king, Jon wasn't sure if it was the dream that was making his heart race, or the thoughts of the melee to come. Ever since yesterday, there'd been a voice in his head telling him something was off about this melee, something not quite as it seemed was going on. Now, as he stood there in front of the king waiting for it to start, it was getting louder and louder, saying it over and over again. He had said hello to Brienne and tried to do the same to the others, but they had just ignored him, thinking no more about it. He had lined up. But as the herald introduced them and the order was given to begin, he realized he should have paid attention to the voice. Brienne faced off against Waymar Royce to the side, while the four other boys approached him, and Loras, all of them walking slowly towards them, and as Jon looked to the king's position, he saw it, the smile on Jon Arryn's face. He'd been set up, the duels had been rigged, all to place him here now where he could actually be hurt. He turned to Loras, who seemed to have come to the same conclusion. Loras to me, Jon shouted, and Loras and he stood facing the two Riverlanders and the two Vale boys. 4-2. This should be fun. the blonde Harold Harding said as he swung his sword at Jon. Jon and Loras maneuvered as best they could, but quickly found themselves back-to-back, facing two opponents at the same time. Hadn't been something they had trained at. Loras had told him and Jaime that his brother had started to do it, but Jaime had said that while it would help, they wouldn't need it for a long time. Had the situation he was in been less likely to end with him being hurt, then Jon would have found the irony funny. As it was, though, he was finding it easy enough to fend them off, but almost impossible to take any of them out. The simple truth was that Jon worked better when he moved. It was his quickness, his movement, that was his greatest strength. Being able to dodge and make an opponent miss left far more openings to exploit than standing still and facing them, but with Loras there, he needed to protect his friend as much as himself. So he reined in his natural instinct, and instead hoped he'd wear them out as the two Vel boys hadn't been able to land a hit on him yet. "What are you the bastard's protector? Can you imagine that, a son of a lord protecting a bastard?" One of the Riverlanders said as the other moved to join the Vale boys in attacking Jon. "He's better than any of you," Loras said, and Jon shouted as Loras moved away from him to attack the boy. He knew now was a Vance. The other Riverlander, a piper, had joined the two Vale boys now, and while Jon wasn't happy, Loras had given up his position. It did free Jon to move, which he took full advantage of. His sword flew swiftly at Mitchell Redfort, quickly and precisely, and the other boy was forced back. Piper moved in, and Jon deflected a strike only to see Harold Harding smirk as he went to attack Loras from behind. Jon, in moving forward, and Loras in moving in the opposite direction, had put almost 15 feet between them. He now also had Mitchell Redfort and the Piper in front of him, blocking him from Loras. And as he saw Harding move towards his friend, he knew he would be unable to help. "Loras, watch out," he shouted as Harding swung for his friend's head. Loras managed to duck, but it was over for him. Jon looked on as he was caught across the side, and then Harding hit him an elbow to the back of the head. Loras crumbled to the ground. The two boys in front of him laughed as they saw the expression on Jon's face. He looked to see Waymar Royce yield and heard Harding speak to the Vance boy. "You go occupy the freak. We'll take the bastard," Harold Harding said, as the Vance went to Brienne. Jon felt it then, felt it deep inside of him, the fire rising. He let the flames engulf him, let it wash over him, and he turned to face the two boys in front of him. He saw the smug look Harold Harding was giving him, and the flames yearned to be let loose, to burn that look from his face. He nodded and moved towards Redfort and Piper, and the dance began. He moved to the left as Redfort swung before he spun and caught the boy across the side, moving closer. He turned so he was holding his sword blade behind him, its hilt facing Redfort. He moved in. The first blow caught him under the chin, the second on the jaw, and Mitchell Redfort fell unconscious to the ground. Jon turned to the Piper and smiled when he saw the boy's look of shock. Without giving him a chance, he was on him. A dodge right, a parry, and Jon was behind the boy. He raised his foot, and kicking backwards he heard the popping of the boy's knee. Swinging his sword without looking, he caught the boy hard across the back. He looked to Harold Harding and relished the look of fear on his face. In the corner of his eye, he could see Brienne beat the Vance, and then he looked to see Loras laying on the ground. He looked back to Harold Harding and ran towards him. Ducking underneath the swing of the boy's sword, he again used the hilt, and in his fist he slammed it into his stomach. As Harding fell to his knees, Jon, still holding his sword hilt out, brought it up and slammed it against his chin. Watching as the boy who had looked so smug just a moment ago fell back, his eyes were closed. As was knocked out, standing now facing Brienne, he nodded and threw the sword down before running to Loras. He knelt down and checked on his friend, glad to see him coming round. "You'll be all right, just a bruise or two, you idiot," Jon said, smirking. He helped him up and turned to take him to the back, but Brienne interrupted. "Jon, it's still you and I left," Brienne said. "No, it's fine. I yield. The day is yours." "What? No, don't. I don't want to win it that way. Please," Brienne pleaded. "I'm fine, Jon. I will be. Fighter." "Are you sure? It's 5,000 dragons. There's no shame in winning like this," Jon asked, looking to Brienne. "Would you call this a win?" Brienne said, and Jon shook his head. "Fine. Then let's do this with honor." "With honor," Brienne agreed. "If you both don't mind, I'll just sit here for a second," Lord Jair said, and Jon smirked as he almost fell to the ground before sitting down. Jon walked back to get his sword and looked at the carnage he'd brought. People were carrying the three unconscious boys back, and Jon found he cared not. They had hurt his friend, and they had paid the price. He looked up at Jon Arryn and couldn't resist the urge to smirk, before bowing. "It seems we have one more match, Your Grace." Jon said and smiled when the king laughed. Facing off a few moments later, against Brienne, Jon knew he was in for a different fight. The fire was gone. He felt no urge to hurt Brienne, no urge to humiliate or show her up. He respected her, which given the stance she had taken up was the right thing to do. Whoever won would win on merit, so be it. To 5 or yield, Brienne? You think you can make me yield, Jon? Brienne asked, and Jon couldn't help but laugh. One she joined in when she realized it was with her and not at her. The first hit caught him by surprise, the power behind the blow almost knocking him to one side, but he began to move. She was good, very good, and apart from Sir Jaime, he didn't think he'd faced anyone better. She was strong, Jon was quick, she was exquisite in her technique, so Jon was unorthodox in his strikes. The second point went to him, as did the third and fourth. But Brienne won the fifth. Jon faked a spin, and she fell for it. He caught her on the side, but she responded with a quick hit, making it 4-3. The two were concentrating so hard on their moves that neither could see the smiles on each of their faces. She moved forward, and Jon jumped back. She pressed, and he danced away. She grew frustrated, and he struck. The blow, harder than he'd intended, caught her arm, and her sword fell. He moved towards her and raised his sword to her neck. She nodded. I yield. Well fought, Brienne. Well fought, Jon said. He turned to walk to Loras, and she walked with him. Even as the herald announced him as the winner, he was helping his friend to his feet, and Brienne helped him half-carry, half-drag Loras to the back. There were more important things than winning, after all. Jon Arryn. As he looked out at Jon Snow, he felt something he had only felt once in his life. Hate. He actually hated the boy. It should have given him pause, but it didn't. The boy was proving to be an absolute nightmare for him. Initially, he'd been so happy to see Ned's son do so well, to see him training to be a knight in the south and far away from that heathen place his father called home. Even seeing him with the Lannisters had in Jon's mind been well worth it. At least with them, he'd learned to follow the true faith. Meeting the boy for the first time at Casterly Rock had been like seeing Ned reborn. Though quickly he had come to realize that, while he may look like his father, Jon Snow was a far cleverer young man. The things he'd done, the achievements he'd made, beggared belief. The mines, the windwheel, the ships, those damnable ships. When he'd seen one up close, he'd shuddered. If those things were ever turned into warships, they'd be unstoppable. The Fury looked like a rowboat alongside the monstrosity in the docks. He turned to look as the boy smirked at him before bowing. The nerve of him, a bastard born of lust and desire. He glowered at the boy. Though it was to no avail, the boy seemed impervious to scorn, which itself was surprising. Most bastards knew their place and accepted it, but Jon Snow thought far too much of himself. As he looked at him facing the large boy, he hoped that at least this one would teach him respect, that he would manage to do what his own lads had failed so terribly at. Look at him, Jon. Did you see him? Did you see what he did to those lads? Robert said, laughing, and Jon felt like screaming loudly. Your Grace. Most impressive. 3 of them, Jon, 3 of them, and he took them down like they were nothing. Ned should have been here to see it, to see his boy. Robert said, sitting on the edge of the seat, watching as Jon Snow landed hit after hit on the large boy. Jon just nodded along and continued to glower angrily at the boy. It had seemed so simple to him. When he and Pater had discussed things after the meeting with Jaime Lannister, his friend had come up with some interesting plans. The nerve of him, who does he think he is, to speak to us like that? Pater, I want the Queen's expenses cut. Her and the Prince. From now on, we give them the barest minimum. Let her go cry to Casterly Rock for coin. Jon said angrily, Of course, my lord. As you wish, we needs must make things right with the Tyrells, though, my lord. Should they decide to withhold their coin, then we're in serious trouble. I know, but I'll not go grovel to that old witch again. Jon said, shaking his head. Leave it to me, my lord. I know what to say to Olenna Tyrell, but you'll need to speak to the king. We'll have to give them something. Have them as guests of honor at the feast. Show them we're on their side. You think that'll be enough, Pater? You know what they want, and damn, but not even I can make Robert give them that. He wants a Stark bride for his son. As if the last Stark girl didn't already almost cost us the throne. We needs must let them think it's happening, though, my lord. Let them believe. Perhaps we can bleed them for more while we do so. You're right. Now what about the damn Lannisters? The boy, my lord, Jon Snow. Ned's lad. Aye, my lord, Yaime's quite taken with him. Should something happen to the lad and you were to step in. We could use that, Pater said, a smile on his face. But we can't hurt the lad, Pater. He's Ned's lad. I won't have him hurt. Of course not, my lord. Something else. Something which would need your help with. Something legal. Ah, I see where you're going. A legal problem for a bastard, where we can step in if Ymir reconsiders. Yes, that might work. We'll need to keep Robert away from it, but yes. Let me think on this. As you wish, my lord, Putir said, getting up to leave. Thank you, Putir. You're a great help. I don't know what I'd do without you. I live to serve, my lord. When he'd heard about what happened at the feast, he was irate, but it gave him the opportunity to use it. Something surprisingly, the queen was well ahead of him on and had already set in motion. But then things had gone wrong there. Robert had arrived and tried to stop things before they started. He talked him around a little, but even then it fell apart. Where the boy had learned to speak like that, he didn't know, though he'd heard tale that the imp was clever. Perhaps that was it. He wondered as Robert cheered the bastard on beside him. He'd almost lost his composure completely during the boy's responses. Everything went downhill fast after that, and then, out of nowhere, the boy suggested a damn honor joust. He'd never even heard of such a thing. Him an anointed knight of the Seven, and yet this bastard boy from the heathen north knew of honor jousts. It made him furious. Before he could step in, though his foolish good brother had accepted. Robert, of course, loved the idea, bragging about the damn boy's balls all the way back to his chambers. His foster son was an absolute fool. He knew that now. He'd known it then, but he was the only route to the throne. At times he tempered his worst impulses, worked it so they were forgotten, though at the cost of coin for tourneys or whores, for feasts and wine, but occasionally even he couldn't rein him in. And when it came to Jon Snow, that's what probably upset him the most. The boy reminded Robert far too much of Ned, so his feelings were always at the forefront of his decisions when the boy was concerned, threatening to legitimize Maya, God's how he hoped, the lie he told there didn't come back to bite him. As if Mael Redfort would marry a bastard girl, but lie yet because one legitimized bastard could lead to more, and Jon shuddered at the thought. So, when it came to Jon Snow, the only way to handle Robert was to see the boy humbled on the field. If he saw him being beaten, then he'd forget about him. He'd still think of him as Ned's son, but not as the warrior reborn, which he was starting to see him as. Ever since that damn tourney, he'd wanted to see the boy fight again. So Jon would show him the boy was nothing special. It had worked mainly. Robert was bored in his matches with the phrase. Jon had arranged it so his opponents were so poor that the king would lose interest, and it worked. God's Jon, these phrases are awful. Surely there's better competition out there for Ned's boy. I'm sure there is, your grace, but the draw is the draw, Jon said, smiling as Robert took another drink. Gods, even my weakling son could have beaten those two. Robert laughed, and Jon looked on as the queen and prince glared at the king. Isn't that right, boy? Even you could beat the damn phrase. I could beat them all, father. If I was out there, I'd win the whole thing for sure, Joffrey said loudly and gloatingly. Then why aren't you, boy? Why aren't you out there? Robert looked at his son with disdain. Your grace, it wouldn't do for the crown prince to take part in such a spectacle, Jon Arryn said, and hated the pleased look he got in return from the queen. Wouldn't do to see him being knocked on his arse, you mean? Robert said, laughing loudly. Yes, it had worked all right, perhaps too well, the king's attention forced from the duels to his nightmare of a son. Gods, Jon was thankful he'd be long dead before that horror ever took the throne. He looked back out to the field and was annoyed and aggravated to see Jon Snow hold his sword to the tall blonde lad's neck. The damn bastard had won it all. Again, instead of gaining coin from the Lannisters, he'd actually be shelling out coin to them. Well, to their damn bastard squire. Did you see that, Jon? Now that was a fight. Where are they going? Call them back? No, wait. Look at him, Jon. Look at Ned's boy, helping his friend off the field. Now there's a son. Any father would be proud of. I'm sure Ned is very proud, your grace, Jon said through gritted teeth. You damn well better be, Robert said before laughing and draining his drink. Marjorie. Marjorie looked on in horror as the boy caught her brother across the head. She jumped up and shouted out her brother's name, much to the disgust of the prince sitting a few seats away. When she saw Jon go after the boys, though, she had felt it deep in her heart. He would protect him. He'd make sure they didn't hurt him more. Jon was fierce, and had those boys not hurt Loras, he'd have scared her. But instead, she felt happy to see him hurt them, happy to see them fall. When she saw Jon throw his sword down after beating the boys, she had almost swooned. He was a true knight, her true knight, a voice in here. Head, said, and she shook it away for now, more worried for Loras than anything else. She turned to her mother, who was looking just as concerned as she was, her grandmother fiercely looking at the Vale and Riverlords. He's up, thank the seven, her mother said, and Marjorie looked out to the field as Jon helped Loras to his feet. Is he all right? Is my boy all right? Her father said, and as Margaery waited for her grandmother's barb, it never came. He is my love, look, her mother said, her relief clear. Margaery watched as Jon spoke to the large blonde boy. Were they the final two? Did Jon not yield so he could go to her brother? She wasn't sure what was happening, but she watched as Jon smiled and tick his head before Lorsia had said something to him, and he nodded. Her brother stumbled to the ground, but stayed seated, looking on, and she felt her heartbeat slow as she realized he was hurt, but not too badly. She looked around the crowd as Jon picked his sword up and walked forward to address the king. It seems we have one more match, Your Grace, Jon said, and he smiled before the king laughed. When he turned to face the other boy, Margaery was stunned. She hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't a boy. Jon was facing, it was a girl, a rather tall girl. She watched as Jon and the girl spoke before laughing. Who was this girl? Did Jon know her? Were they friends? Margaery found herself looking at the girl more closely. She and Jon began to fight. It was different. Much different than the fight with the boys was this because he liked this girl. She watched as the fight went on. Watching Jon move was like watching a dance, and she now felt even more upset that they hadn't had the dance he promised her. A part of her didn't like that he was dancing with this girl here now, even though it was a far different type of dancing. When Jon won, she cheered along with the whole crowd and waited for him to notice her, to smile at her like he always did. But Jon didn't wait, didn't look to her. Instead, he walked with the girl away from them, and Margaery felt her heart sink. She looked down at her hands on her lap and shook her head sadly. She needed to go and see Lorsiers and make sure he was all right. As she stood up, she looked to see Jon and the girl helping her brother, and she smiled. It wasn't that he didn't look for her, or that he wanted to spend time with this other girl. Jon was worried about Lors just as she was and would rather help him than listen to a crowd cheer. She stood up and began to move to the back. Where are you going, sweetling? Her grandmother asked. I'm going to make sure Loras is fine, grandmother. I'll come with you, dear, her mother said, and Margaery smiled at her. The two of them walked from the stands and headed to the back where she knew Loras and Jon would be. As they walked, her mother asked her about her morning and how things had gone with the food order, which surprised her as she hadn't spoken to her mother about what she and Jon were doing. It went well, mother, though it seems we underestimated things. It would take us moons to hand out that much food. Good, that's so much better, sweeting. How so, mother? Sweetling, if you gave out food to people who need it, what happens when it's gone? They go hungry, mother. Margaret said, realizing where her mother was going with this. Indeed. So if it's going to take moons to hand it out, what happens? They get fed for longer, so it takes them longer to go hungry. Oh, mother, that's wonderful. Jon will be pleased, Margaery said as her mind began to work out the possibilities. They could hand out some food, deliver some to orphanages, then the rest could be handed out regularly, allowing people the chance to at least get some sort of regular meals. She and Jon could even expand upon it, have regular shipments added to their stores. Margaery couldn't wait to speak to Jon about this. They turned the corner and made their way to the tents where they saw Jon, Loras Maester, Lord Jaime and Lady Jenna, and the girl from the fight, much to Margaery's annoyance. Lady Ashley, Lady Margaery, Lord Jaime said, noticing them first. Lord Jaime, Lady Jenna, her mother said, and she repeated before almost running in to see her brother. She hugged him tightly and watched as Jon bid farewell to the girl before turning to her, a soft smile on his face. He looked worried, though, concerned, and she too began to worry. I'm sorry, Margaery. I should have done better. I should have made sure Loras wasn't hurt. I'm fine, you know, Lorsiad smiling. It's quite all right, Jon. I was so worried, though, Margaery said, as Jon smiled at her and moved closer to rub her back. She felt her heart race and almost wished to cry just so he'd hold her tightly. My lady, my apologies. It's my fault. I should have done better, Jon said as her mother entered. It's fine, Jon. Lorsias, how are you feeling? Sweetling, her mother said and fussed over her brother for the next few moments. Both she and Jon enjoyed the looks Loras gave them, proving he was less hurt than she feared. They stayed for a while before the master said Loras would be fine and gave him some milk of the poppy, which much to their amusement made him behave quite silly when they brought him back to the Lannister manse. After putting him to bed, Jon escorted her and her mother back to the Red Keep. She told him about her ideas regarding the food distribution, and the look he gave her reminded her so much of her grandmother and the looks she'd give her when she figured something out. that she couldn't keep the beaming smile from her face. When he told her who the girl was he'd fought at first, she pouted, but soon she realized Brienne wasn't his friend. The same way she was. "Are you nervous about the joust tomorrow?" "No, not really. I win or I lose, so be it," Jon said nonchalantly. She hit him then hard on the shoulder twice, watching amusedly as he looked at her in confusion. "What was that for?" "That's for making me worry. What were you thinking, Jon? You could have lost your hand and a joust." "Don't you know what happened to my brother?" she said angrily. "Margaery, I'm sorry, please. Look at me. I'm sorry, all right. I didn't think. But I had to. I had no choice," he said pleadingly. "Of course you did. You just didn't want to choose it. Why not have Loras speak for you or Jaime? They were there. They saw how Lord Tyrley acted. Aye, if they had then, there'd be more trouble than ever. I'm just a bastard, Margaery." "You're not. You're more than that. You're Jon, just Jon," she said, and he smiled. "Aye, to you I am, but to them I'm a bastard, so a bastard's word is nothing, but if Jaime spoke or Loras, well, then that's the Warden of the West, the son of the Warden of the South. That's huge, Marjorie. That would create problems. Between the Riverlands, the Reach, and the Westerlands," she said, and he nodded. "But a joust, Jon, it's dangerous, you could be hurt," she said worriedly. "Aye, though should I carry a beautiful maiden's favor, I'd be sure to win. Would I not?" Jon said, and she laughed. "Really? And what beautiful maiden's favor did you have in mind?" she said, her lopsided grin and raised eyebrow hiding her blush. "Why, my Lady of Highgardens, of course," Jon said as he bowed to her. She giggled as she reached into her dress and took a ribbon from her pouch, the green and yellow colors gleaming in the light. Jon held out his arm and she tied it to it, smiling all the time. "I shall return it after my victory, my lady." "See that you do good, Sears," he said, and they both began to laugh. "Please be careful." "Just Jon," she said as she turned to walk away. "I shall endeavor to return unharmed. Just Marguerite." The next day, Jaime, gods he missed this. It had been years since he'd jousted, years since he'd faced off against a worthy opponent, though given his draw for this, it may still take a while for that to take place. Both Jon and Loras accompanied him this morning, though he did send Jon off to do some practices himself, much to the boy's annoyance. He had laughed loudly when he saw Jon's shield. That was going to raise some eyebrows, but still the boy was a novice, and though Edmure was no talent to be sure, he was older and stronger. There would be 5 jousts before the final. His first was against a knight from the Stormlands, a Cerobarsa Karen from Night Song. Jaime's golden armor was shined to perfection, both his boys having spent hours on it. Honor was draped in a bright red caparison, the golden lion clear on either flank. Usually Honor wore Kingsguard colors, but even though he was still one, to the realm at large he was the head of House Lannister. He took the lance from Loras and smiled as he saw Jon on Winter poking his head from the corner to see the tilt. The herald made the introductions and Jaime kicked Honor into gear. His horse raced down the line as if he had did so just yesterday, its instincts more primed and attuned than Jaime's own. The first hit landed on Baerys's shield, as did the second by the third, though Jaime was in his element, the rustiness all but gone. He heard the cheer of the crowd before he felt the force of the blow that took Cerobarsa from his horse. Turning back, he caught his sister's eye and shook his head. The woman no doubt assumed she'd be getting a crown when all Jaime wanted was to rip one from her head. "My lord, that was outstanding," Loras said, smiling brightly. "Aye, it was not so bad, though it still needs to better." "Better, my lord? You think that ride would beat the bold?"